Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association podcast. I'm Eric Weisseth,
And I'm Jack Hurdy.
and today we're going to talk about all sorts of fun stuff, including National Trails Day, new public lands working group here in Idaho, an executive order from President Trump and what the potential consequences of that are, Mike Lee's attempt to rescind the Roadless Rule again through sneaky tactics, Snake River Dam economic analysis, and the Public Lands Integrity Act. We also will have a great interview with Kristin Sleeper, who is one of the policy advisors to the governor and has also had a bunch of other kind of big kid jobs for super fascinating interview with a super fascinating person. Yeah. Well, Jack, we're back for another week. All sorts of fun stuff.
Well, all right. Yeah. I'm excited. We got a banger of an episode today. But first things first, Eric, you got to get out of the office a little bit last weekend for National Trails Day. How was that?
Yeah, National Trails Day, got to go up with a bunch of outfitters up out of Stanley to kind of the very southern edge of the Frank and clear out a trail that hadn't been cleared in what sounds like probably a decade, and hopefully open up the ability for one of the outfitters who has a camp that's authorized for use up that trail that he hasn't been able to use in a long, long time. We cleared out, I think the final count was 433 trees in an
Wow.
afternoon. Covered about, I think, 3.5 miles or something up to the ridge before we hit snow and had to stop. But overall, it was a lot of fun. And it was neat to sort of be effective. Like, you really get up there and see a difference. This place that people hadn't been able to go. And it was super cool trail, incredible views of the Sawtooth Valley, and just this amazing resource that really hasn't been able to be used in a long time. So to open that up and hopefully people will get out there and experience it, that was really neat. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of fun,
But
and I learned a lot and kind of got to see some of the realities of some of the stuff that we're doing. And yeah, it was good. Really good.
nice. Did I
So,
see you got to bring your
yeah.
son out there too?
Yeah, no, Rowan came out with us. In part, we drove up Friday night and camped out, which was awesome. And then cleared trail that morning because we had to be in Boise by the evening because one of his Christmas presents was going to monster trucks.
Nice.
So, yeah, no, Rowan came with me, hiked the trail for a little while, and that was neat. It's always fun to get the kids outdoors and do that kind of stuff. So,
That sounds like a
yep.
great day. Clearing trails and then
Uh,
monster trucks.
Clearing trails and then doing monster trucks. Yeah, no, I mean, I probably enjoyed parts of it more than I enjoyed other parts, but it was still great day with my kid, keeping it, doing something he was really excited about. So that's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
have you heard anything? It
speaking of
sounded
getting
like
out,
Big Water Blowout was this weekend.
yeah.
Did you hear anything about
Yeah, I
it?
was going to say. Well, I know Hardy got up there for a couple days. I was gonna go, but got hung up with some personal stuff. Yeah, it sounded like it was a really good time. I think, despite the fact the water wasn't as high as it's been in other years, Hardy told me there's great turnout, a lot of enthusiasm for the guides, lots of people putting their boats in and just having a good time on the river. And I think it's really just like a good community event for that town, kind of get everyone together before the season so you can kind of go down to the boat ramp, in angry August and see the friends that you made back in June. So shout out to Roy Akins and the rest of the Riggins crew for putting that together. It's a great event. I wish I could have made it.
Yeah, I was, I had a great time kind of with National Trails Day doing that, but there's a piece of me that is always going to be in Riggins on the first Saturday of June. It's the Big Water Blowout's a great event, and it sure looked like both the music and then the Dutch oven cook-off was a smashing success this year, and it's always a favorite of mine to go around and just eat basically a bunch of great food. So
Oh, yeah.
already got on the calendar for next year. But all right, we'll get into some updates. To start with, this last week, Jack and I attended a new legislative working group that's focused on state lands and the management of state lands, led by Representative Raybold last week. So it was really exciting conversation. We had a bunch of different kind of interest groups there that basically are coming to the table to talk about finding productive solutions to managing state lands and keeping them public for all users to enjoy. So excited to see where the conversation goes. It was kind of the first of what will hopefully be many and hopefully lead to some real outcomes in the future, but too early to say. Jack,
Yeah.
I thought it was great. What'd you think?
Yeah, I thought it was good. It was a good, I think, first step. If folks are following along, Representative Raybold was uh, the one who offered the amendment to adjust the mandate for state lands last session. That would have given a greater priority to revenue generating activities as well as outdoor recreation. So we felt like it was a good deal for outfitters in the session last year. It was disappointed to see that not pass. But I think she's kind of staying persistent and bringing the people that need to be together in the room to talk about what needs to be done. So I'm pretty excited to see where it goes, and I think it's going to be really good once we kind of get up and going with it.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
walked away from it with, I think, a few sort of takeaways that I had, things I was encouraged by is that one, a very diverse group of people around the table coming from
definitely.
timber and mining and grazing and recreation and everything. And it seemed like one of the core concerns everyone had was public lands being sold off and thinking that that would be bad for whatever their constituency is. And so that to me was really encouraging. And then also kind of a universal, seemed like voice going around talking about, we need a coordinated effort of managing recreation around the state. So both of those were things I thought was a really good sort of starting point for this conversation. So again, we'll
Yeah,
see where it goes. But all right.
yeah. All right, next item. This one's maybe a little less fun, but still important. So the end of May 29th, President Trump signed a new executive order that was titled Removing Unnecessary and Counterproductive Restrictions on Access to Federal Land. What that EO actually does is it rescinds two kind of longstanding regulations that have shaped how federal agencies manage motorized use on public lands, going back to Nixon and then Carter. There's two of them. These are kind of the foundation of the travel management rule. This gets really wonky, but travel management rule is kind of the framework that governs how roads and trails on public lands are open or closed to motor vehicles. So what the rescission does is it gets rid of the minimization criteria, which kind of meant that federal agencies had to do their travel management in such a way that would kind of minimize impacts to soil, water, the environment, as well as other non-motorized users. So, like I said, this is pretty in the weeds, and it's kind of getting deep into the regulatory framework here. It's not going to change anything like right now. You're not going to go out and see people driving ATVs all over the non-motorized trails. But what it does do is it's directing the agencies to start doing new rulemaking to kind of revise or repeal any of the regulations that they already have that are based off of those two executive orders. Um, Repealing the travel management plan or travel management rule, excuse me, has been something that's kind of been in the crosshairs for a while. But that's not what's happening yet. This could be setting up that move, but we're not really totally sure about that yet. Um, yeah, like I said, the travel management planning is kind of the plans that govern motorized travel and access across, the millions of acres of public land in Idaho and other places. So by repealing or substantially weakening that planning process, it's possible we could see more motorized access into places where we haven't seen it before. One thing I was saying about this when I was researching for this episode, I think this administration, they really like to kind of come out and do things that are really big and splashy, grab a lot of headlines, kind of piss off a lot of people. And then when you dig into the details of it, it's not always the most durable. Like it's something that, either isn't going to have a big effect or it's going to, get overturned by the time the next administration comes in, or the courts are just going to hang it up. I think this is the opposite of that. This is kind of one of the things that flies under the radar a little bit, but has big impacts in the long term. Like it's not splashy, it's not that interesting. But over the next 10, 20 years, like this could have a real big impact on the way that our public lands are managed. So just something to pay attention to. There should be public comment periods that follow along with this. And so that's where, especially as your local forest is going through their travel management planning, that's where you really got to stay engaged and pay attention and see how motorized access is changing, whether that's good or bad for your business, because it can go both ways. But we'll try to stay on top of this and let you know when those comment periods are open. But yeah, if you guys hear of anything or know anything more about this, please let us know so we can work with you on it. Yeah, Eric, any more thoughts on that? I know it's kind of a long spiel.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think just to ground it for people, if you go out and say like ride mountain bike on some trails that are mountain bike only, or mountain biking, hiking, and horses only, which seems like pretty common trifecta. And they don't allow motorcycles. That sort of exclusion of motorcycles is founded typically in travel management, and so this could change that reality. I think there's also some conversations around e-bikes, and I think some of the prohibitions on e-bikes are also anchored in travel management. And to say that the travel management plans and the travel management system is perfect it's not. And there's been, I think, a long time, there's been some real needed revisions to it. This is interesting because I've been talking since we saw this come out to a lot of pretty smart people high up in, around DC and everything else, and trying to figure out exactly what's even going on here. And so far, I have not talked to anybody who really feels like they understand what the bigger framework of this is, or what's really going on, or what they're getting at.
Yeah.
It could,
Mhm.
it's going to probably inspire revisions of travel management. And there is a worst case scenario where that results in complete removal of them. There are people, again, sort of conversations you have and people around where it sounds like there's folks very high up in, say, the Forest Service or wherever else that are pretty opposed to that, and makes it pretty unlikely that, full revisions are going to happen because they see the value in travel management. But, what those revisions look like, it could even become pretty locally contextualized too in the long run. And so how this could impact things. I think this is one of those things, to Jack's point, we're just going to have to keep our eye on it and see what actually happens. It's one of these things that you kind of hear about other things that are coming down the pipe, and maybe this is actually connected to those or setting the stage for something else. But it's unclear right now. I think, to Jack's point, it's really just something we're going to keep an eye on. And it could be one of these things that ends up actually opening the door to create some what are today real problems, and ends up being, a net nothing or a net positive, or it could, and how it gets implemented, turn into something that's a big net negative. And part of that will come down to how much attention we pay to it, and, advocacy that happens by us as rulemaking happens and everything else, assuming that's the direction that this goes. But something worth noting for sure, because they don't do things like this for no reason. So we'll see.
Yep.
See where it goes.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. The implementation is going to be critical.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Speaking of roads and trails, Eric, what happened the other day?
Oh man. Well, our senator from our favorite state down south of us here in Idaho is back at it. So the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee approved an amendment rescinding the 2001 Roadless Rule. So Mike Lee, at the last minute, on a bill related to fire and funding fire and doing a bunch of things, a bipartisan bill that had been worked on for a long time and was really a pretty positive deal. At the last second, Mike Lee slid in this rescission of the 2001 Roadless Rule, and it created for a pretty contentious hearing that ended up passing out of committee, or the bill passed out of committee. So I think it's important to remember, though, that that's all it did. It passed out of committee. It is not law. There's still a long way to go. It would have to go to, vote through a normal vote through the Senate, which is going to require 60 votes to get past the filibuster. And Democrats are already talking about, not supporting it. We did see our Idaho delegation, or Senator Risch did vote for this in the committee, but where they goes from here, who knows? I think another piece that's really important to comment on here from an Idaho perspective, Idaho has its own roadless rule, and this does not impact that. So I think Colorado is the other state that also has a roadless rule, and this won't impact that either. So if the state has a system for it, which we do, this actually wouldn't make a direct impact on us. But it will have consequences for our neighboring states. There's a lot of areas in Oregon, for instance, that this could have an impact on, that I think is pretty negative, and could be pretty negative for the outfitters that operate there, some of which operate here. So overall, this is not a positive. The process it went through, to me, seems not a positive, and we certainly will be reacting to this and sending our opinions up the ladder. And we would encourage all of our listeners to do the same, because don't think this is something. It certainly isn't the way to do this, and doesn't seem like a good move. Is my read.
Yeah. Yeah, I was disappointed to see Senator Risch vote for this. I think obviously it was kind of sprung on him last minute, and probably had to make a quick decision one way or the other. But you know, it's just bad process, first of all, and it's being attached to a bill that had been worked out kind of on a bipartisan basis and probably would have had a good chance of passing. And then instead, it passed out of committee on a party line vote. It was like 11-9. So there's no way this thing becomes like the larger bill is not going to become a law now. Like it could have been a good piece of legislation, and now it got this poison pill, which maybe that was the goal, to just kill the larger bill. I don't know, but yeah, we'll definitely be making our displeasure heard a little bit on this one, I think.
Yeah, it seems like a strange bill to want to kill. Like, it almost feels more like maybe he thinks this is one that, they want to force people to vote against it because it actually does a lot of really good things. But
Yeah,
all the same, it's not a great deal. It's not a great process, and it's a real bummer that it's happening. And it's going to require some advocacy. But nothing's happened yet. It's just got out of committee. So if you think it's a law, it's not. All right. Well, moving on to, we should post the link to, what is that thing Aaron always posted? The Schoolhouse Rock video on how a bill becomes a law or something.
Yeah.
He'd always show it at the beginning of like the annual meeting, giving people a lesson how laws work. Awesome. Well, Jack, I know you've been engaged in, something that IRU was working on and trying to evaluate the economic impact of dam removal for the lower Snake River dams. And I think something's coming along with that. You can tell everybody.
Yeah, so Idaho Rivers United, we've been kind of working with them as kind of in an advisory role, but they just came out with a new report done by Headwaters Economics. And basically what they were looking at, I think they were trying to get a better understanding of how dam removal affects the local economy of the area, like proximal to the dam. So in this case, trying to better understand the lower Snake River dams and the effect that they do or don't have on the Lewis and Clark Valley. So I did a number of things looking at kind of other dam removals, looking at the local economy in that area as it exists right now. And then came out with this report. And, spoilers, I think you can say that the dams are probably not having a huge impact on the Lewis and Clark Valley's economy, actually. The sectors that the economy is built on is not super related to dams. There's not been very much economic growth in the last 50 years anyways. So we're going to have a webinar about this next week on Tuesday night. And we can post the link somewhere for folks. But I'm going to chat with Stephen Pfeiffer of Idaho Rivers United, and we're just going to go through the report, talk about the economics of it all, and then talk a bit more about kind of the opportunity that the lower Snake River could create for the outdoor recreation economy, whether that's upstream or downstream of Lewiston. There's a lot there that we can kind of go over. So, come on out. You don't have to leave your couch. Just log in on your computer and listen to me talk some more. It's going to be fun.
Just what people want. Yeah.
That's what the people want, Eric.
It's what the people want. Sit on the couch and watch or listen to you talk.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I'm excited that's coming out. I know we've been having that conversation with them for a while, and it's been sort of a long project coming. So it's neat to see that come to fruition, and look forward to hearing more about it. All right. Well, time to jump into our last kind of big piece of news, the Public Lands Integrity Act. Jack, you want to give a little update?
Yep. So hopefully people are sitting on their couch listening to me talk some more, and they saw the Instagram or Facebook post that I made about this. But this is a piece of legislation that's just been introduced on the Senate side, and then now on a bipartisan basis on the House side. And it's very simple. It just closes this loophole that would allow public lands to be sold without 60 votes in the Senate. So going back to last year when Mike Lee was trying to sell public lands, he put that piece of legislation into a larger budget reconciliation bill, which is a special process the Senate uses. Well, both houses use it, but the Senate uses it to bypass the filibuster. So you can do stuff in the budget reconciliation bill with only 51 votes. Also key to know about this is that public lands are like selling public lands is considered revenue generation. And so when you're doing a budget bill like that, you need things that generate revenue to pay for the spending that you're going to do. It all has to balance out. That's like the way that it works. Um, so, it's easy to look forward and, even though we defeated Mike Lee, it's easy to look forward and think that someone else is going to come along, whether it's Mike Lee again or somebody else, and try and sell public lands to pay for kind of their pet priorities, right? You can generate billions of dollars, basically without having to raise taxes at all like that. It's pretty appealing. This bill is basically making that not allowed within the rules. It just shuts the loophole altogether. All it says is you cannot sell public lands in budget reconciliation, basically. So now that this bill has been introduced, we would like to see our senators sign on to it as co-sponsors. We understand, politics happen and no one wants to be seen as kind of pissing off Senate leadership. But at the same time, like, this is kind of a no-brainer for people back at home. No one wants to see public lands sold off in budget reconciliation. So that's kind of my take on it. Eric, you might have more nuanced thoughts about it, but I do think that this is a good opportunity for us to, let our delegation know how important public lands are to us.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny that we're talking about Mike Lee and his like shady tactics to affect public lands earlier today with his like roadless rule rescission slide into a bill. And this conversation around the Public Lands Integrity Act is a direct response to Mike Lee just a little over a year ago, or a little under a year ago. I don't know, somewhere around a year ago, basically trying to create the ability to sell off public lands through the reconciliation process for the first time. And to Jack's point, a reconciliation bill can go through the Senate with 51 votes versus what a normal bill would need 60. And so with the way the Senate's divided and will be divided for the foreseeable future, just by the breakdown of kind of the country and the way the Senate works, no one side is going to have 60 votes, in anything that resembles the foreseeable future. And so any sell-off bill that ever did happen under the normal process would require a bipartisan effort. But through reconciliation, they're almost always, one party pushing something through. And this bill would close that loophole so that anything that ever did happen would need to be bipartisan, which makes it far, 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 far less likely that it happens unless it's something that just makes a lot of sense. And so it is a simple just backstop to make sure that no future version of Mike Lee tries to do the same thing. So we have talked to both of our Senate offices about it, and we would ask those who love public lands, which is pretty much everybody that probably listens to this, to call your senators and tell them to support this bill and to get on board, because we think it's a common sense solution to solving this problem forever and just making sure that it's not something that sneaks back in down the road, which it almost inevitably will now that it's been opened as a possibility.
Yep.
So
well said.
Call your senators.
Call your senators.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that is the news for the week. So there's a little bit of good. There's a fair bit of bad. But, we're recording this on Thursday. So, that's something. Water's flowing, all that kind of stuff. Awesome. Well, we'll get into the interview. So the interview this week was with Kristin Sleeper, who, as we mentioned at the beginning, is a special advisor to Governor Little. And she has a fascinating background. She's served at kind of all levels of government and has a lot of history around public lands and recreation and all sorts of other things. Just super smart person. Great to have her here in Idaho, and fun conversation around public lands and recreation and just sort of the future of a lot of these things in our state. So hope you stick around and hope you enjoy the interview. The Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association relies on the support of our members. Thanks to our Dollars for Outdoors supporters who go above and beyond just having membership. Cascade Rafting Kayak, Mile High Outfitters, McGowan Outfitters, White Cloud Outfitters, Bear Valley, Rapid River Outfitters, Soar Northwest, Bighorn Outfitting, Mystic Saddle Ranch, and Table Mountain.
Also, our Dollars for Salmon supporters, where their money goes specifically to support our work advocating for anadromous fish recovery. That's Rapid River Outfitters, SNS, Canyons, Solitude, and Salmon River Drifters. Thank you all so much for your support.
All right, Kristin Sleeper, thanks for joining us today on the Outfitters and Guides podcast.
Thank you. No, happy to be here with you all. I do wish we were both outdoors somewhere and not sitting in our respective offices, but nevertheless, happy to chat.
Yeah, agreed. But it's Friday, I think, and so hopefully the weekend is right around the corner and we'll be out doing something fun. You and I've gotten to chat a little bit since you kind of showed up here in Idaho. You're relatively new to the governor's office, and we got some opportunities to catch up throughout the session. But I've got a lot of listeners who probably don't know who you are, what your background is, what you do. So just really quickly, kind of give us the Cliff Notes version of your background.
Sure. Well, I'm a native of Detroit, Michigan. I would say that's the number one question I get from Idahoans is what is your connection to Idaho? And I don't have one. I was drawn to this place due to a variety of backgrounds. So I grew up in Michigan, went to school, then I started working in natural resources policy for the Forest Service, for the Department of the Interior, all in Washington, D.C. And so I had spent some time in D.C. thinking about natural resources, and then sort of as I was getting older, I decided I needed to go to the West and think about natural resources. So I moved to Montana for 5 years, spent time working at the state on natural resource issues, and then somehow got tricked, I'll say tricked for lack of a better word, back into moving back to Washington, D.C. I worked on Capitol Hill, and then I spent the most recent past year in the Trump administration at USDA overseeing the Forest Service. And then after that year, I ended up here being Governor Little's policy director. I joke that I have the dirt portfolio. If it grows in the dirt, has dirt on it, comes out of the dirt, that is what I am tracking here at the governor's office. So it's been a great transition. We've been here for 6 months, and I see why all people love Idaho for sure.
Yeah, so you're at USDA, pretty like having a pretty critical role from my understanding there, like doing a lot of really cool stuff, getting to oversee a lot of things. What was it about sort of the ask on Idaho? Like why'd you take the phone call? Why'd you take the job? What brought you to Idaho?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was functioning in a dual capacity at USDA. I was the Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment, and I was also the Secretary's Senior Advisor for Forestry and Wildfire. And ironically enough, I came out to Idaho and rode a horse with the governor and talked to him about on his trail ride that he does every year. It's actually happening next week. We talked about all kinds of important issues, and I sort of believe that states are these laboratories of democracy. That is truly where you can innovate at the government level. And Idaho had everything I was looking for, a host of natural resource issues, a lot of investment in different types of infrastructure, and a lot that I think leads the way in the nation, especially when it comes to public lands. And so when Idaho called, it was kind of an irresistible offer to continue to do the things that I was doing at the federal level, but at the state level, and with a variety of more partners, and thinking about how to sort of grow the footprint of natural resources here. And so Governor Little is also incredible to work for. He introduces himself as Brad from Emmett, right? Who doesn't want to work for a principal that knows more about your issues and has literally worked on them for decades? So it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, and I definitely wanted to leave DC and get back to the West.
So this like the sales pitch on you coming out, like, hey, I want you to come out and we'll chat about you taking this role. And it's, hey, I want you to come out. We're going to talk about this while we're riding horses.
That was pretty much the sales pitch. It
That is
was
so
we
rad.
we are looking for someone to take over we're going to have some staff transitions, and would you be interested? And I said, my phone is always on. And the governor, he'll probably hate that I say this, but he was riding a horse named Princess. I was riding a horse named Daphne. And you know what? He called in August. He gave me a call, and after that, we were sort of kind of riding off into the sunset together. It was a great opportunity for me and for the state.
That's awesome. I love that. So your role in the governor's office now is, I believe, from the email line, policy director. And so, like, I totally know what that is, but in case I have listeners who don't, would you just kind of like tell us? I mean, you sort of answered this already, but like, really, what is your role at the governor's office?
Yeah. Some days I ask myself what a policy director does, and I've been in this job for 6 months, so we're still learning and evolving. But as I mentioned, I primarily have the natural resources portfolio. So we here in the state of Idaho have executive agencies, so the Idaho Department of Lands, Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation, Fish and Game, et cetera, et cetera. So I work really hand in hand with that set of directors on both the governor's priorities, their individual priorities, how we want to address legislative priorities. Here in Idaho, we have trying to think of the right word, a very active state legislature. And they have a lot of opinions about public lands, and many of them are holding office to talk about public lands issues. So, a fair bit of strategy on working with legislators. There's always funding questions. I'm sure we'll get into this later on in the podcast. How do we adequately fund some of the things that we want to make sure we provide to the citizens of Idaho here? And then a whole host of what I'll call other duties as assigned. Sometimes we're working at the federal level with our partners, our congressional delegation, anything that really sort of someone comes to me and they say, I have a problem. My job is to identify the policy solution or the suite of policy solutions to address that. So that can look like anything from we need a permit template, we want every single permit to look the same, to maybe we should have a deadline on our permits if an agency needs more information so we provide more clarity to folks. To maybe we need to ask for additional funding next legislative session. So we're getting that started right now. I feel like session ended in April and we started right again to prep for the next session. So it's really fun. It's a problem solving oriented role. Someone once called me a slop manager. I don't really love the negative connotation there, but people have problems, they cannot solve them. So then they come up to our office and look for us to sort of help them figure out what the best path forward is. And usually we want to help them figure out how to make that happen.
I love that. Yeah, as I think back on my days as an outfitter and think about our outfitters, I always sort of frame that as it's a solve problems job. Like that's what you do all day. You don't know what like you wake up in the morning, you have no idea what new problems are going to show up during the day. But it's actually kind of exciting because it's just a broad spectrum of things and you get to solve things and think creatively. It sounds awesome.
It is
Yeah.
fun. I would like this role is one where you get to bring a lot, like you never know what's going to come across your desk. It could be anything from like rats and how do we mitigate rats in Ada County
Yes.
to how do we fix a sinking boat ramp in northern Idaho or all of the different things. And so I've stopped trying to predict what people will say when my phone rings, but it's definitely the type for people who are curious about the world and how to make it a better place for all.
Yeah. I've been in this role since almost a year now. And that's been one of the same sort of takeaways. I'm never quite sure what new thing. Like I've kind of given up trying to understand how my days are going to go because they generally aren't how I expect it. But the difference is that you actually, you make decisions and they have probably more profound consequences for people than me just choosing who I'm going to annoy for the day is part of probably what I'm doing. Couple questions. One, have you been on a long river trip yet?
I have not been on a long duration float trip. I've done some day trips down rivers, but I've never had what I would call the opportunity to do some of those long duration. I would tell you, I would love to put my cell phone in a plastic bag and not be able to answer it for 4 days. So on my bucket list for my time here in Idaho, hopefully I'll get lucky maybe this fall, but I'm definitely looking to do that in my short time, sort of
It is
sometime
one of the
soon.
key Idaho experiences, so we'll have to see if we can uh, find an opportunity for that. And then, you have one young kid, I think is what you told me, and I know how that kind of upends a lot of freedom in life, having had a couple of them myself. But, if you have some free time, what is your outdoor recreation activity of choice?
So I have a 5.5-year-old, and he is a little mountain goat. So I would say our family's preferred method of recreation right now is hiking. And, I'll be taking the switchbacks, going slow, breathing heavy. And he's like already at the top yelling down. We had to have sort of a hiking safety talk about how he can't get out of my field of vision because we don't know what he'll find around the next corner. I personally would really like to get into mountain biking again. I used to mountain bike all the time in Montana. Then I became an urban fixed gear bike rider. It's kind of not the mode here in Idaho. So hoping I can carve out some time to do that. I'd like to join a biking group and meet a bunch of rad girls who like to shred in the mountains. I want to do that with them.
That's awesome. There's a lot of mountain biking to be had. So hopefully you find some time and can make that happen. Shift gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the outdoor recreation economy here in Idaho. The number that keeps kind of getting tossed around and seems like is relatively accurate is the outdoor rec industry here in Idaho is about a $4.5 billion industry, which from the numbers I've seen makes it larger than mining, larger than timber, and one of the fastest growing segments in the state. We have some of the best assets to support that industry with massive wilderness, 3,100 miles of floatable rivers, healthy herds, world-class angling, and arguably the country's strongest industry of outfitters and guides, if I do say so. So how does the state, the governor's office, how do you think about growing and developing this sector?
Well, first, just a fact check for you. I understand that Idaho has the most river miles outside of any state aside from Alaska. We don't count them. They're too far north. Is that true?
Yeah, 3,100 miles. Yeah, it's the most miles of navigable whitewater in the lower 48. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well,
the
that's
whitewater
amazing.
state.
Hey, I'll take it, right? That's very cool to sort of say and to add into the lexicon about why Idaho matters in this grand scheme. I think if we take a step back on your question, right, and you sort of keep that $4.5 billion number in the back of your head, it's 2018. We're seeing unprecedented levels of recreation already. And then we go into 2020 and we all sort of know what happened then. And then recreation sort of spiked off the charts. I think, Kristin Sleeper's opinion, not the office of the governors, I think people spent a lot of time being like, whoa, life is short. We can do and we can live wherever we want. And so we saw this sort of jump in recreation, and everybody thought at the time, and from policy perspectives, a lot of people thought it was temporary. We were going to see this big spike in recreation. And then as we came out of the pandemic, we would sort of go back to those 2018 levels of recommendation. Well, wrong. Incredibly wrong. Happens to policy people all the time. Just pick up a newspaper about Washington, D.C., and recreation has exploded. And for good, right? It is a major, we have agriculture as the state's number one industry, but recreation is right behind it, bumping up against it in many cases about what's happening. As I mentioned at the outset of the show, my background is in natural resources, and always in natural resources, we talk about timber towns that are dying or stalling out. Recreation is giving these towns a new life. There are opportunities in these small towns that these communities are wonderful. I think you said the best outfitting and guide community are in around these towns, and they've sort of changed how they've been doing business. And it's saved many of them in a lot of cases. And so now we have to figure out sort of recreation is continuing and showing sort of no satiation of demand. It's going to keep getting. So now how do we provide that access, and what does that access look like? And there's not sort of one, like what I have learned in my time in recreation policy is like, there is not one like unified voice for how we sort of fix the recreation problem. You all have motorized recreation. You have non-motorized recreation. We have people who use RVs. I think RVs may be like one of our largest drivers of recreation here, but then we have people who like to recreate in the winter, who like to ski and snowmobile and do all of those things. We have mountain bikers, we have hikers, we have people who just like view sheds and going to beautiful places and staring and enjoying them. And so in this sort of competing demands and competing pressures on the system, even within the recreation community, we have these competing demands and competing pressures. The good news for all of us is that it's helping our economy. It is growing good, high-paying jobs. It is bringing people to Idaho. Now, if you ask some Idahoans, they might say we have too many people here in Idaho. I think the real challenge upon us here at the governor's office is how we want to manage that growth and how we want to invest in the things that matter. So when you do move to Idaho, you have all the access that you need, or you have the resources that you have, the resources that you thought you were going to have. And that goes everywhere from rural healthcare to public schools to also our recreation infrastructure. It's all on a spectrum. And so I think we have to harness this growth for good. I think we have to have all kinds of diverse voices at the table and figure out how we have a limited set of lands to work with here in Idaho. Our state boundary isn't going to change anytime in the near future. And so, what do we as Idahoans want to see? What do we want to be able to do on that landscape? How do we have mines and timber operations living sort of symbiotically on the landscape with all of the recreation uses that we have? How do we invest in the infrastructure? How do we open new campgrounds? How do we sustain our state parks? All of these questions are really relevant and timely now because in my opinion, recreation demand is only going to grow. And I'll put my hand up for those listeners who are probably rolling their eyes. I'm part of the problem. I moved here so I could have a better quality of life. I moved here so I could recreate in my sort of limited free time. And I wanted my son to grow up here and have access to all of these things that are beautiful and breathtaking and awesome. And part of the reason I think we all still live here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the question I would get to is, as the governor's office, outdoor recreation in the state has really, I don't know if developed like organically is really the right term, but it has been kind of, individual locations or individual segments have promoted themselves, built themselves, and it's kind of piecemeal and pocketed, right? The example I use is I first came to Idaho, oh gosh, I don't know, long time ago. But I grew up in Southern Oregon, so not very far away, one state over, and was an incredibly active outdoor person, incredibly active river person, all these things. And I just remember driving into Idaho for the first time and being like, how did I not know this was here? This is crazy. Like, this place is amazing. And it kind of felt like this thing that had been hidden and people were starting to discover it. And again, back to COVID, they did. But do you think that there's an opportunity for a more organized or coordinated growth in this space versus Ketchum doing Ketchum stuff and then Stanley doing Stanley stuff, Salmon doing Salmon stuff, etc., but something that is, I guess, bigger picture and coordinated as we think about outdoor rec?
Yeah, so I think all the time, I'm a policy nerd, right? So this is like where my brain goes, right? We need a coordinated recreation strategy. We need travel management plans for how we work. We need to manage recreation, or in many cases, right? I hate to use a cliche, like it's going to manage us, right? We're going to have people recreating in unsustainable ways, some user groups ruining it for other user groups. And so when I think about what I want to see here in Idaho, is I want all the groups to come together to figure out how we divide this pie and this beautiful hidden place that's not so hidden anymore for everyone, right? I believe there is a world where we can have an OHV park in some parts of the state, and then we have wilderness and solitude and all of these other things in other parts of the state. But figuring out how we do that together in what I would call a very fiscally constrained environment is hard. The good news about recreation is that one, its users are willing to pay. Not every segment of the economy can say that, user groups are willing to not an exorbitant amount of fee, but right, they understand what good infrastructure does for access and good trail maintenance. And I don't think anybody wants our deferred maintenance backlog to grow exponentially here in Idaho. So, when we take that into account, what partnerships can we have? We are approached here in the governor's office by large organizations, and they want to help us do our trail work or do our trail maintenance and get things done together. So with sort of a collective will to all continue to have this superior access to this beautiful resource we're blessed with here in Idaho with a limited fiscal environment, how do we marry those two, right? And I think that looks like some sort of unified recreation plan here in Idaho, right? Some sort of public process, um, I'm recalcitrant to lead anything from the governor's office just because he's only going to be governor for a tenured amount of time, right? And how do we want this to be durable? And who's going to sort of move the flag from administration to administration as we have changeover here in the state house to keep it sustainable so we all have that. So I don't know what that looks like, but I envision a future where we have a statewide recreation strategy here in Idaho that all user groups can see themselves in and that the public is involved in and is not just sort of some plan sitting on a shelf, right? If we're known for anything in Idaho, it's for getting the actual work done. We do spend a lot of time talking, but then we go out there and we get the work done.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that brings up kind of a great next piece of our conversation. So, one, I love that you mentioned travel management because I feel like that is going to be a big conversation in a lot of places here in the very near future. But Idaho is 63% federal land or federally managed land. And Idaho's done a really good job, I think, historically, of interacting with the with the feds, if anything, leading the way on GNA and shared stewardship. And, talked about like organizations participating in some of these activities. Idaho was leading the way on the Trail Stewardship Act and like outfitters being able to go out and clear trails and those kinds of things. But as you think about this going forward, what are sort of how do you think about that relationship between the federal government and their federal lands and the state? And is the state going to take a bigger role through GNA or shared stewardship or some of these things and changes through the Explorer Act that are coming with changes around those things specifically? But what is the governor's thought on all of that? Does the state see a bigger role in the future?
Well, I will sort of firsthand admit that I was involved in the Explorer Act's passage in Congress. So I have very biased opinions about that I have brought with me here to Idaho. But I think the governor and I are aligned that we want to continue leading in this space. For example, if we're to look at our Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation, currently as it sits, they probably clear about 2,000 miles of federal trail every single year. We think that number can be demonstrably higher with some investment from the federal government, much like we do with timber, right? We have a long track record of success of the Idaho Department of Lands helping the Forest Service execute their timber program. We are looking to double that number moving forward. And I think you all, as recreationists and avid outdoorsmen, you know what a healthy forest looks like. And you've certainly been in an unhealthy forest before. Our goal is to sort of double our timber output from the Good Neighbor Authority program because we know it works, right? There are different bottlenecks that can be removed when the state is involved versus sort of continuing for the feds to go it alone. When we think about recreation, I'm like a huge, why don't we just try and see if we fail, right? Because the worst case scenario is we continue doing business as usual, scrapping our dollars altogether and still staying in our silos and we get nothing done, right? We don't take advantage of the limited opportunities that we have. So what would a statewide GNA agreement look like for recreation? What would it look like if we partnered with every single one of the national forests here for trail maintenance? What flexibilities do we have to accelerate trail maintenance and get more work done to make our limited dollars on both the state and federal side go a bit further? And also one thing that I'm constantly thinking about, and not to say that I don't think about the Bureau of Land Management a lot, but how can we work better with the BLM in eastern and southern Idaho where they have their predominant landscapes? People are recreating out there. There's probably a partnership or two that we could do to sort of change that landscape and make it more beneficial for all. And so I think we have a lot of sort of untapped opportunities with the Bureau of Land Management. And we have the opportunity to push our work with our partners at the Forest Service even further into different and new dimensions as it relates to recreation.
Awesome. So you think there's a lot of opportunities for the state to be more engaged in federal land management in ways that are supportive, not taking over management, but rather stepping in and assisting in their management. Is that probably a fair way to say that?
Absolutely. Not trying to cede any kind of federal decision making to the state level or get into those sort of sticky conversations, but certainly helping and assisting where we can. Whether that's providing workforce, whether that's providing easier access to OHVs, whether that's joint crews or using new funding streams to bring on crews. And I almost see looking at the federal landscape here, like we almost have to have strike forces. Like the landscape, as you mentioned, is you said 63%, or 63 million acres. I'm not sure what you said.
Yeah.
But the landscape here in Idaho, the federal landscape is so large. Like we're not going to be able to do it all in one year. So where do we need to go first? And being having a clear vision of why we're going there first, both at the state, federal, and the local level in the communities that we're operating in. I think there's a lot. Do you have me? I think I
Yeah.
froze.
Yep. You're back.
I think there's a lot of benefit into doing that work and sort of surging our limited resources to truly make an impact on the landscape versus random acts of popcorn conservation where we do a little bit in a ton of places and it really doesn't make a difference.
Yeah. That totally makes sense to me. Earlier this year, the governor signed the Make Forest Healthy Again executive order. What does that do? What was that?
Yeah, so the governor has been really engaged with this administration on figuring out how we can sort of expand our good work. And so Idaho was the first state that had a good neighbor authority agreement, sort of a master statewide agreement back in 2016, I believe. Some users going to have to fact check me on my dates loosely, a long time ago or a decade ago.
Yeah.
And the Make Forest Healthy Again executive order was all about reinvigorating that and crossing into the new sort of frontier, using every single tool we have available to us, signing a new master shared stewardship agreement, which we did this fall with Chief Schultz, and making sure that we are thinking about our landscape in a holistic way. We sort of have two main thrusts in that EO, right? One, we have to improve forest health. And two, we have to reduce wildfire risk. And those always go in tandem with each other in my eyes, because without one, we're not going to have the other, and vice versa. And so the Making Forests Healthy Again was like the Trump administration had put out an executive order on timber. We wanted to make sure we were aligning our policies to help them deliver on that. And I'm proud to say that Idaho has, right? We have committed to doubling our GNA output under this. We are committed to figuring out how we can reduce community fire risk together, right? That involves partnerships. The state is not the only player in the wildfire risk reduction game, but sort of making sure we're moving the ball forward and capitalizing on the opportunity before us. I think when you look at any administration, you really have 4 years to get things done. And we wanted to make sure early on that the state of Idaho was committed so that we could start making progress early on that. So we are excited about that. I think there's going to be a press conference next week after the land board meeting that's going to look, or maybe whenever this podcast comes out, may have happened in the past. About some of those accomplishments. And the governor has a sort of a long track record. He sort of had a report with recommendations on wildfire in 2024. We're delivering on those and continuing to improve because we all stand to benefit if our forests are healthy, period, right? There's really, we've all seen it. And so as we look towards what could be a potentially historic fire season here in Idaho, we want to make sure we did everything we could in advance of that to either lessen the risk or improve firefighters' chance of succeeding. We want to put them in winnable situations when fires do start because we know that's inevitable.
Yeah. So I guess kind of two things on that one. One, we interviewed Chief Schultz for this podcast a little while back, and one of the things he talked about forest health was like forefront of his mind, and someone who obviously knows it from his background. And it's possible I'm getting this wrong, but my memory is he said we actually have more trees dying than we have growing here in Idaho, which was kind of mind-boggling to me. So forest health, definitely something incredibly critical to think about. And then the other piece you started to get into, staring at what could be a pretty significant fire season and doing some things to mitigate it. What are those things that, you guys are prioritizing in that attempt to mitigate what could be a really bad fire season? Or hopefully it isn't. Hopefully we just get rain every week and we're all good and whatever. But in the off chance that it does become potentially a real fire season, what are the things you guys are doing to prepare?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly on your forest health. Chief Schultz is right. Our growth and mortality ratios for our trees are not right. Ideally, you sort of have this symbiotic relationships where you are replaced as trees die, right? Trees, I always have to remind people, trees are sentient. They are meant to die. But when they do die, that you have new trees coming and replacing them. We have a situation right now where we have the sort of rampant overgrowth, especially on our federal lands. And so it is not a good situation for insects, it's not a good situation for disease, and it's not a good situation for wildfire risk. And we actually run the risk of our forests sort of decaying and emitting all of the carbon that they are storing. So there's a really good Washington Post article from I think a couple years ago that talks about sort of the decay of western forests. Take a look at it if you want. But on the sort of what are we doing to mitigate the risk of wildfire season? Well, we're getting coordinated with our federal partners. Chief Schultz came out with his sort of letter of intent, and basically it said at preparedness levels 3 and above, we are going to try to keep fires as small as possible, as quick as possible. And so we are committed to helping them do that. We have a very large state, and we have a lot of area to cover. And so we are aligning very closely with both the U.S. Forest Service and the newly formed United States Wildland Fire Service. I think I got that right, on how we can deploy our resources effectively here in Idaho. From the Idaho Department of Lands perspective, we have all of our engines, I believe, fully staffed. We have a lot of returning firefighters, and we've made an effort through our state pay system to make sure that we sort of increase retention opportunities at the state level. So we're getting our folks ready. We're aligning on sort of the collective goals, regardless of what landscape you're on, regardless of what color your engine is. We're sort of all in this together. And then we're also talking about the public's role in this. I think this probably doesn't come as a surprise to you. You're in the woods with people all the time. Humans start fires. We have more human caused fires than naturally caused wildfires. And so, in a year like this, where we have low moisture, we're facing sort of extreme drought conditions. If you're in certain parts of the state, we need the public to sort of play their part, whether that's calling in smoke, making sure your campfire is dead out at the end of the day, or just securing your trailer chains. One spark can make a difference. We've already seen a lot of wildfires sort of on the interstate corridor, whether it's a car accident or sparks along the roadside. And this will come to a surprise as nobody. It's windy here in Idaho. So one spark in wind is a really bad day for a lot of people. And so making sure that we're doing our job at the state of being prepared for when those fires do start, but also making sure the public is helping us and working with us in sort of our fight to make sure that we get out of what could be a precarious fire season in good shape.
Yeah. The trailer chain thing is, it blows me away every time. Being in Southern Oregon, we had a bunch of big fires that were started by trailer chains on the freeway. Like I remember hearing people say that was a thing and thinking like, there's no way, but it absolutely is. Get your trailer chains
You can
up off the road.
you can definitely see it too. We'll see a spark, and then about a mile later, we'll see a small fire, and then about a mile later, we'll see several more, and then all of a sudden, right, then they all sort of converge into one. It's just like you're like nobody actually starts a fire throwing their cigarette butt out the window, and you're like, oh well, you'd be surprised. That's warm and one breeze, and it can sort of kindle in that sort of dry. In Idaho, here we have a lot of rangeland, scrubland, so you
Yeah.
can do it. So secure your trailer chains and tell your friends to as well.
Yeah. I think this is kind of a ridiculous question, but I'm sort of into it.
Well, I
If
can't
you
wait.
were, yeah, if you were sort of like empress for the day and could change anything about public land management, federal, state, whatever, what would be your decree from on high to make a big impact?
Well, if I am Kristin Sleeper, am queen for the day. One, I would fund public lands like we fund defense. If I'm speaking honestly, it's our nation's greatest
Hell
asset.
yes.
It's our nation's
That's the best answer I could have imagined for that question.
It's our nation's greatest asset. It does not show up on any balance sheet whatsoever, right? But it is what we own, and we need to take care of it. And so queen for a day. So let's say I have already funded public land management like I fund defense, instead of arguing around what anybody in DC will tell you is budget dust. As we look at the America the Beautiful Act or the Great Outdoors Act, it's funny how we fight about these like small sums of money and then we're in the same chamber debating $1.5 trillion for defense. I'm not saying defense is not important. I'm saying we also have a massive asset that I think we have an obligation to take care of. So let's say we have it adequately funded. Um, I feel like we have to find a way, and I think this is sort of happening organically. But you're seeing this sort of growth and demand in recreation. As we have more people using the landscape, we have to have more opportunities on that landscape. And so what does that look like? How do we get more people outdoors and appreciating this so we can start to invest in it from all sides of the chain? And so whether that's motorized, non-motorized, winter, summer, boating, driving, RVing, whatever it is you choose to do, um, from a policy standpoint, right? Uh, Even if my sort of only sport that I enjoy outside is hunting, right? I should want recreation for all different types of that. So I want that common strategy where everybody sees themselves in it and we can all move forward. Like I don't believe recreation is a partisan issue. I actually think it's incredibly obvious when somebody does make recreation a partisan issue. Doesn't go over well with the sort of populace that we have, right? Nobody wants our landscapes to burn up. Nobody wants our forests to be unhealthy. And so, how do we collectively do that all together? And it requires us all to be selfless, which I think you and I kind of know. Not everybody is selfless always. They want to win for themselves and move on for the day. And so, um, adequate funding and then a collective strategy to get more work done so more people can get outside.
I love that. That. Yep. Love that. We should make you the Empress. I'm into it. um, so one of the conversations that has been coming up, and we've kind of, I think, have like flirted with this a little bit in this conversation, is around funding and coordinating and organizing recreation. And in Idaho, we have a mechanism for funding motorized trail work and maintenance. We have, funding mechanism for funding like invasive species prevention through the boat tags. Like we kind of have all of these, but the one we don't have any sort of funding mechanism for is non-motorized trail maintenance. And so, for all the hiking trails and equestrian trails and all those kinds of things. I feel like I've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of years with folks on, what are even the mechanisms you could do to create a funding mechanism for those things, because we need it. We need the ability to help fund non-motorized trail maintenance. What, from your office, one, is this a thing that's even on your radar? And two, what are the 30 ideas you've heard and that you think have some legs?
Yeah, so this, you're correct. I have heard 30 different ideas. Not maybe that many, but it's certainly on our radar because people want to talk about it because it is non-motorized recreation is chronically underfunded and it's one of our most used forms of recreation here, and we want to keep investing in it. I think probably everybody on this podcast has hiked on a trail that's not in good condition or stopped to hike and gone and done something else because of the poor trail condition. I've seen firefighters not be able to do their jobs because of trail conditions, right? It's too hazardous. They just can't go in there. And we literally have to change firefighting tactics because of the way the system has not been maintained. And that's a lot, right? That is a policy problem that can and likely should be fixed. And so, here in Idaho, we've had ideas from looking at how we manage recreation on our trust or endowment lands, looking to our neighbors. Montana has a conservation license that everybody must purchase just to use the lands. Looking at sort of changing up the funding formula for the stickers, for the OHV stickers, and having one sticker for recreation. We've looked at increasing the park pass and what that would do and what revenue that would create. In a conservative state, though, right, any fee increase, any additional burden onto taxpayers is a really tough sell from a political standpoint, right? There are politics involved in anytime you raise any cost that Idahoans will bear. That's why you elect us to protect you from that, right? Um, So when we think about these things, so we've heard of like having a license to recreate, to trails groups, to changing funding allocations, to creating new funding streams, to taxing AI in data centers, to I mean, you name it. People have come in here and one thing that an innovative constituent brought me was taxing the nicotine pouches that people use. Now, I'm not trying to take on the tobacco lobby in my current job, but people are looking at sin taxes and things like that for how we can create revenue streams to do the work that oftentimes doesn't generate sort of the real dollars, but improves experiences. So more people come here, so they spend more of their money in the local communities and they benefit from it, right? Um, so I'm not sure what the right fit for Idaho is. I know there are super intelligent folks like yourself who are convening groups to figure out how we tackle this non-motorized recreation problem. I'm curious how the federal government is going to be looking at it. They're using innovative tools and trying new policies that we haven't seen before. And ultimately, we just want to figure out what it's going to take to make sure that we have good experiences and good trail maintenance. And the thing with maintenance, I always have to remind people is that we can go in once and we can maintain the trail. You have to go back, right? It's not a one and done. It is this continual evolution of an investment, and that's a tough pill to swallow, and it's expensive at the end of the day. And so figuring out what model is going to work for Idaho, how we're going to divvy that up amongst our stakeholders and our user group is going to be really important.
Well, thank you. Kristin Sleeper, thanks for hanging out with us today. Is there anything else you want to add on
I would
we
say
didn't cover?
well, just for all the folks listening, our office is always open. There hasn't been a good idea that we've turned down yet. So don't be a stranger. Come to the state house and be involved. Make sure your voices are heard in our state house. We could certainly use more of them advocating for what you all want to see. So thanks for having me, and I'm definitely happy to be here and happy to be an Idahoan now.
We're happy to have you. You're a great addition to the state. I love how you preface that with there isn't a good idea that we have turned down.
That's right.
You didn't stay. You leave out all the bad ideas that
That's the democratic process, right? So we're happy to have all those good ideas that you have out there and get them into motion or help you in any way. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And Erik, thank you so much for having me on. This has been awesome.
This is great. Thank you so much. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening today, and thanks to Kristin Sleeper for a great interview and for agreeing to come on. Honestly, I was pretty shocked that she would go slum down and talk to us, so that was pretty awesome. And thanks to all the outfitters and guides in Idaho who are out in the field, working hard, sharing our incredible state with people who would otherwise never have the chance to fall in love with it. Please reach out with any questions, comments, or other suggestions for future episodes. If you liked the episode, subscribe, tell your guide, outfitter friends, etc. But most importantly, if you're not a member of the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association, please consider joining. It's the support of our members that allows us to continue our efforts advocating for this community. We will see you next week.
And as Greg McFadden always says, keep the furry side up.
All right.